Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins is one of the most polarizing players in the NFL. He has been a polarizing figure pretty much since he entered the league. He was not drafted into the best of situations. I say it all the time on this channel. It is critical that a young quarterback coming out of college is drafted into the most ideal situation possible. Aaron Rodgers, for instance, drafted by Green Bay back in 2005. At the time, it probably wasn't where he wanted to go. He had to sit 2-3 years behind Brett Favre before he got the opportunity to prove himself, but it ended up being the best thing for his career. The Packers groomed him for 3 years for long-term success. Kirk Cousins, on the other hand, was drafted by Washington. Redskins, owned by Dan Snyder, one of the worst owners in the NFL. Hell, they drafted RG3 and Kirk Cousins in the same fucking draft, which was a recipe for disaster. Didn't make any sense. You draft a potential franchise quarterback in the first round, then you turn around 3 rounds later and draft another quarterback. But that's Dan Snyder for you. Kirk Cousins has never been respected by fans or media in the NFL, to be honest with you. Wasn't respected by the Redskins as an organization. He was the first quarterback in the history of the NFL to be franchise tagged twice in consecutive seasons. There is only one reason that the Redskins did that. They didn't believe that he was the long-term answer at quarterback. It didn't help his polarization when he signed that 3-year deal a couple of years ago with Minnesota worth $84 million that was 100% guaranteed. It was the first time in league history that a contract was fully guaranteed. And it went to a player that most people felt didn't deserve it. Kirk Cousins is getting a fully guaranteed contract. Not Russell Wilson, not Aaron Rodgers, not Drew Brees, not Tom Brady. Kirk Cousins. It was unbelievable at the time. The outrage was fully understandable in a way. And I wouldn't really call it outrage. Maybe more like disbelief. Kirk Cousins was being paid like a top-5 quarterback. He had never won more than 9 games in a year. Never won a playoff game. Hell, he had only made the playoffs once at this point. The Vikings were paying him like he was the second coming of Brett Favre in Minnesota. The media at that point had crafted a narrative that Kirk Cousins was an average at best quarterback. Now, obviously, the Minnesota Vikings have been pleased with Kirk Cousins' performance because they just extended his contract another 2 years a couple of months ago. Last year was the best season of Kirk Cousins' career. Now, statistically, he was down. Statistically, it was the worst season of his career. But it was his first 10-win season. Got his first playoff win in one of the most difficult places to win in the NFL in New Orleans. And he was accurate as hell with the ball. Completed 69% of his passes and, more importantly, only threw 6 interceptions. Even after the success of last season, people around the country still don't consider Kirk Cousins to be a top 10 quarterback. When in reality, you can make the argument that today, Kirk Cousins is a top 5 quarterback in this league. But Casey, that is fucking blasphemy. I know. I get it. I know. But I'm about to make the case for you. I was one of the biggest critics of Kirk Cousins last season. He can't win the big game. Struggles in primetime games. Can't beat winning teams. I was one of the loudest people saying all this stuff. I bought into all the same media bullshit just like everybody else. He impressed me last year when I watched him in person in the Superdome during the wild card game. But I will be perfectly honest with you guys. I'm going to shoot you straight here. Until I started doing research for this video, I didn't fully understand that a lot of the failures in Kirk Cousins' career had very little to do with Kirk Cousins. When I was going to make this video, I was actually originally going to talk about the possibility of Kirk Cousins regressing in 2020 after he got his contract extension in Minnesota. But the more I read about it, the more I looked into it, my opinion has been changed, and I'm going to explain it all right now. Let's start with his time in Washington. Let's go back 4 or 5 years. Kirk Cousins took a lot of unnecessary abuse throughout his time with the Redskins. Now, he didn't help matters with the whole "you liked that" bullshit that he started, but that was really in response to the lack of respect that he was being given at the time. Dan Snyder, owner of the Redskins, was never a believer in Kirk Cousins. The fan base in D.C. was never fully behind him. And looking back on it now, I don't understand why. The Redskins are awful. They are an awful organization. Kirk Cousins took over a Redskins team that was a complete and utter clusterfuck. They were coming off a 4-12 season in Jay Gruden's first year as head coach. The offense, god-awful. Running game, non-existent. Defense, god-awful. 2015 rolls around. Kirk Cousins' first year as a starter. He turned everything around and carried the Redskins from worst to first in the NFC East. They won the fucking division. After going 4-12, they come back the next year and win the division. Now, what was the difference in 2015? I know, the defense must have been better. No, they were still dog shit. The running game must have been better. Nope, no, it was hot garbage too. The difference was Kirk Cousins. 2014, you had RG3 as the primary starter. 2015, Kirk Cousins the primary starter. Now, mind you, the 2015 season was the year that bashing Kirk Cousins became popular. After he started the season playing awful, the Redskins got off to a 2-4 start. Everyone jumped on the shit on Kirk Cousins bandwagon. It was all his fault that the Redskins were this bad. Never mind the past 20-some-odd years of awful football in Washington. It was all Kirk Cousins' fault. No one mentions, when talking about the 2015 season, the times that Kirk Cousins stepped up under pressure. After Jay Gruden threatens to bench him if they don't beat Tampa, and I think it was week 7 of that year. Tampa Bay in that game jumps out to a 24-0 lead. Kirk Cousins leads the comeback. Washington wins the game 31-30. That's when that obnoxious "you like that" started. No one talks about the 4-game winning streak to close out the season that got the Redskins in the playoffs and won the NFC East. 3 of those games being on the road, where Cousins averaged 290 yards a game with a 76% completion percentage. No one talks about any of that. So after he leads the Redskins to an NFC East division title in the playoffs in 2015, going into the 2016 season, Kirk Cousins is still being doubted nationally and in Washington. Now, this is all happening in the midst of Drew Brees leading the Saints on 3 straight 7-9 seasons. But no one was blaming Drew Brees for that in New Orleans. It was always the fault of the Saints' defense. Kirk Cousins did not get that benefit of the doubt. Going into 2016, even the hometown Washington Post was predicting that 2015 Kirk Cousins was an anomaly. Here's an excerpt from an article from before the season that was posted in the Washington Post. Quote, "In the history of the NFL, there have been 15 quarterbacks, including Kirk Cousins, to throw 500 passes with a touchdown percentage higher than 5%, combined with an interception percentage that ran 2% or lower. Only 5 quarterbacks did it more than once. Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, Tony Romo. Those 5 are likely headed to the Hall of Fame, making it doubtful Cousins joins that group of repeat performers." End quote. Now, guess who became the 6th quarterback on that list? Kirk fucking Cousins. Even after all the doubt, all the media disrespect, Kirk Cousins had his best year statistically in 2016. Threw for damn near 5,000 yards. The Redskins missed the playoffs, of course, because that's what the Redskins do best. But it wasn't because Kirk Cousins was underperforming. So we're 2 straight years into Washington right now. Kirk Cousins doesn't have a defense that can stop anyone. Kirk Cousins doesn't have a running game that he can lean on. He is literally carrying the Redskins on his shoulders. Now, the 2017 season was an absolute disaster, but once again, the organization, Dan Snyder, in my opinion, was more to blame than the play of Kirk Cousins. He was franchise tagged again, 2nd year in a row, which had him questioning, and rightfully so, Washington's commitment to him. His offensive coordinator, Sean McVay, left to coach the Rams. The Redskins decided that it would be a great idea to let Kirk Cousins' 2 favorite wide receivers walk in free agency, Deshaun Jackson and Pierre Garçon. The offensive line was in tatters. 2017 was a disaster for Kirk Cousins. Yet, he still led the Redskins to a 7-9 record. Now, I bring up his time in Washington because everyone always points to the same thing when they are evaluating Kirk Cousins. He's terrible against teams that are over 500, which is true. There is absolutely no disputing that. He's 9-31 against teams with a winning record. But, a big bulk of those games were when he was playing in Washington with the Redskins, carrying a terrible team. Last year in Minnesota, Kirk Cousins was 3-5 against teams with a winning record. Well, that's fucking terrible too. Is it really? Is it? You know what Drew Brees' record last year against winning teams was? 2-2. What about Tom Brady? The GOAT! The greatest ever! He was 4-4. 2 of the greatest to ever play the game were 1 game better against winning teams than Kirk Cousins. Sometimes we get carried away, myself included. We get carried away and give quarterbacks more credit for winning. And we forget that the NFL is a team game. I always point back to the Saints from 2014 to 2016. No one will argue the fact that Drew Brees is one of the best quarterbacks to ever play the game. 3 straight years in New Orleans, the Saints were 7-9, with Drew Brees putting up record numbers. He couldn't overcome the bad team that was surrounding him, much like Kirk Cousins couldn't overcome the bad team in Washington. The fact of the matter is, since 2015, statistically speaking, Kirk Cousins has been a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. Now, I always say on here that stats can be misleading. But when I was researching for this video, I found something that explained to me why Kirk Cousins doesn't get the credit that he deserves. From 2015 to 2019, the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL have been Kirk Cousins, Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, Tom Brady, Russell Wilson, in no particular order. SB Nation did a study and broke down all 5 quarterbacks' games by passer rating. They took all of their games from 2015 to 2019, broke them down by passer rating, and what their win-loss record was when they had a certain passer rating in a game. So, say Tom Brady had a passer rating of 85. They took that and took their win-loss record. They put it in categories, 80 to 85, 85-90, 90 to 95, stuff like that. And they took their win-loss records of every category and put them all together. And what I found was interesting, to say the least. All 5 guys had winning records when their passer rating was 95 or better, which is obvious. I mean, your quarterback plays well, the team plays well, you win football games. It makes sense. But here was the interesting part. There are going to be games throughout the year when your quarterback is off. They're struggling. It is going to happen. In games where Tom Brady struggled, had a passer rating of 85 or below, he was 10-8. Russell Wilson, 8-12-1. Aaron Rodgers, 8-13. Drew Brees, 7-9. Kirk Cousins was 0-22. 0-22. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you that throughout his career, or at least before he got to Minnesota, that Kirk Cousins was playing on shitty-ass teams. If he didn't play well, the team lost. When he did play well, his team was 42-13-1. Imagine for a second that Cousins' teams had won 8 of those games like Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson's team did. Just imagine for a second that Kirk Cousins' Washington Redskins team had won 8 of those games where his quarterback rating was 85 or below. If that were the case, Kirk Cousins would have more wins over the last 5 years than every other quarterback in the league but Tom Brady. The only reason that Kirk Cousins isn't touted as a top 5 quarterback is because of his win-loss record. Only one 10-win season, one playoff win. But as I just showed you, he is a victim of his circumstance. He was drafted into a bad organization and still lifted that organization to the playoffs while Dan Snyder was blowing up everything around him. Kirk Cousins has thrown for over 4,000 yards 5 of his 6 seasons as a starter. One of the more accurate passers in the league. Now, guess which season was the lone season that he was under 4,000 yards? Last year in Minnesota, when he had Dalvin Cook in the backfield to take some of the pressure off of him. The first time in his career, he had a top running back in the backfield. And Cousins led his team to the divisional round of the playoffs. I'll be honest with you, I think Minnesota wins the NFC North this year. I think Green Bay's going to regress. The Bears are a fucking mess. The Lions are always a disaster. I think 2020 could finally be the year that Kirk Cousins gets the respect that he deserves on a national level. And that's the respect that top 5 quarterbacks get in this league. Or at minimum, a top 10 quarterback. I'd take Kirk Cousins every day over Dak fucking Prescott. Alright, that's all for today. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button for me. Click the notification bell to receive all notifications from the channel. Leave me a comment in the section below. Let me know what you think about Kirk Cousins. Do you think he is a top 5 quarterback in your opinion? Give me your thoughts. You can follow me on Twitter at KC_BTL84. If you have any questions for me, you can email them to BTLKC84@gmail.com. I will see you guys next time.